Okay. Uh, okay. Why is that tooltip showing up? All right. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about stocking your Unix toolbox. Um, so what I mean by that is, uh, when I say Unix toolbox, um, what I mean is like the commands you know how to use in Unix, and this is largely you know I mean, the more tools you have, the more things you can do, the more time you can save, the more efficient you could be. So these are, really important. It's really important to learn new things in Unix, and there's always something new to learn, no matter how much you know. So this is just kind of you know, an introduction to the things that are out there and things you can learn about. Okay, so the questions I'm going to answer. This screen looks a little funny. Okay, it's okay. So the questions I'm going to answer today, I'm thinking about from the perspective of scientific computing. Um, the kind of questions we ask are, how do I edit my source code? How do I compile and run my source code, which we already answered, so you should know the answer to that one. How do I share changes with my source code? Because this is something that can really, get messy if you don't do it right. How do I document my source code? And then finally, I'll just talk a little bit about scripting. So you can really, using scripting, you can really just script away all of your problems. Scripting is really nice. Okay, so the first question you'll probably ask is, why should I use a Unix text editor? This is like 1980s technology. I mean, Emacs and Vim, these are the two most ubiquitous Unix text editors. They've been around since like the 70s. I mean, it's really old technology, so why should we use it? Well, first, it's universal. Any Unix system that you get will have Emacs and VI, or Vim, on it. So no matter what machine you're working on, you'll always have access to these two text editors. Another nice thing is you don't need a mouse. You can use a mouse if you use a particular version of it, but you don't need a mouse. So everything can be done from the keyboard, which makes things a lot faster, a lot more efficient. And if you're editing files on a remote machine, this is really handy. If you're using, something like TextMate or Xcode or BBEdit or whatever text editor you use, if it gives you a GUI, then now you're kind of stuck on your local machine. You can't SSH into another remote machine and run Notepad or run TextMate or whatever. So the advantage is portability. Another advantage is there's a huge user base. I mean, when I say these are ubiquitous, I mean like ubiquitous. Pretty much any programmer who's serious about programming uses either Emacs or VI. And so there's a lot of programmers writing really neat things that you can use, really neat plugins and scripts and all this sort of stuff. And when you need help, you just hop on Google and there's 100 different answers to your question. But as with anything in Unix, you really have to try it for yourself and see what works for you. So I'm not going to stand up here and say you should use this text editor and here's how you should use it. This is really, your personal decision. So just before I talk more about the text editors, I just want to go over some terminology. A buffer is like throwaway or scratch space. So if you edit stuff in a buffer and you close without saving that, then it's just going to be thrown away. It's like temporary space. You aren't editing, so if you open a file, the text editor is going to give you a buffer that's filled with that file. So as you edit that file, you're not editing that file in place. In other words, if you close without saving that file, it's not going to change that file. So that's what a buffer is. A window, you all know what windows are. It's just when you double-click something, it opens a window, right? So frames are a little bit different than windows. Frames you can think of as windows within windows. So you can have Emacs running in a window, and then you can have multiple frames inside that window. Same thing with VI. So you could say look at two different source code documents at the same time, but still keep one window. Okay, so as I mentioned, Emacs and VI are the two ubiquitous text editors, and there's all kinds of debate about which one's better. But this is like trying to debate which is better, ninjas or pirates. You know, there's no right answer. Depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers. It's like trying to debate iPhones versus Google phones, or pancakes versus waffles. There's no right answer, you know. And I see somebody back here thinks there is a right answer. So there's actually, if you look at the Wikipedia page for editor wars, you'll see that there's even a Church of Emacs and a cult of VI. So I mean, it's crazy how passionate people get about their editors. But the point is, there's no right answer, because this is Unix. You can use whatever works for you. So I just want to talk a little bit about Emacs and VI, go over some basic commands. So Emacs, you can think of Emacs as a behemoth, full-fledged text editor-based operating system. So one of the criticisms of Emacs used to be that Emacs stood for 8 megabytes and counting still. And this was back when 8 megabytes was a lot of RAM. So back in the 80s and 70s, you know, Emacs was a really big program, but now, you know, it's a drop in the bucket. So it's also been said to stand for Escape, Meta, Alt, Control, Shift, because Emacs uses these modifier keys. That's what's unique to Emacs. You have to use, you know, Control keys and Alt keys and all these different modifier keys. So Emacs can edit files. You can compile code. You can run debuggers. You can step through your code. You can, you know, browse directories. You can run shells. You can write macros. You can have a calendar. You can have a journal. You can be productive, or you can play Tetris. It's got a built-in psychologist. I mean, this thing is like, it's got everything in the kitchen sink. So Emacs is really nice in that sense. A lot of people use Emacs and they never leave Emacs. So the entire day they're doing all kinds of different things, but they're doing it from within Emacs. They never have to leave Emacs. So you can actually even get email set up through Emacs. So you can send emails through Emacs. Okay, so yeah, so just some terminology before I start. The capital C key stands for control, and the capital M key stands for meta. And so on Macs you can use Alt for meta, or you can use Escape for meta. So I talked about buffers. These are these temporary scratch spaces. You can list all your buffers doing Control-X, Control-B. That'll give you a list of all the different buffers that are currently open. And the nice thing about Emacs is you can have 20 or 30 buffers open, and they're all open at the same time, but you only have to look at one at a time. And you can switch between buffers. If you run Control-X-B, that'll switch you to a different buffer. So you can, you know, tell it, okay, you can type in the name of your buffer, and it'll switch to that buffer. And when you give, you know, Control-X-B, if you give it the name of a buffer and there's no buffer that exists like that, it'll give you an empty one. So we already talked about Windows, nothing to say there. But there's also this frames feature. So you can use Control-X and the number 0. That gets rid of all your frames. Control-X2 gives you 2 horizontal frames. And Control-X3 gives you vertically split frames. And you know, you can sort of do this on your own as I'm talking. So if I do Emacs, and I'll open my .emacs file. So if I do Control-X2, now I've got 2 different windows. So I can browse them separately. And if I do Control-X0, it gets rid of that extra frame. If I do Control-X3, it gives me a vertically split window. And I can sort of nest these. So if I run Control X2 again, it'll split that vertical half into another horizontal half. And I can, so, you can just do like, all you want. And it's kind of fun. And then if I type Control X0, it's going to get rid of that incrementally.
So this is the same file opened in
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How does it handle conflict if you're editing the same line, for example?
So there's not two separate buffers. So if I do Control X3
it will change
and I delete this, this comment, it'll delete it in the other buffer as well. And then I run Control X, Control C to exit, and I tell it I don't want to. Oops, no. And I tell it I don't want to save my buffer. So the buffer is just scratch space, and so if I edit the buffer, it says, okay, you edited this buffer, do you want to save it? And then you can also use this Control XO, and that'll switch you to the other frame. So there's a lot of nice mnemonics, B for buffers, O for other, So you'll see that in all kinds of different text editors. Yeah, so just some Emacs basics. If you want to open a file, it's Control X, Control F. So you see more of these mnemonics, F for file. This Control X just means you want to execute a command. So I mentioned Emacs is like this operating system in itself. And so you can, if you ran Control C, that would give you all kinds of, a whole set of different commands. If you ran Control Z, that would give you a whole set of different commands too. So you can see that there's all these branches of commands that you can give. Control X, Control S saves a file. Control X, Control C closes Emacs. Okay. And when in doubt, sometimes when I'm in Emacs, I'll be giving Control X and then I'll hit the wrong key, or I won't know exactly what I've entered so far. Control G is it's like a universal escape from the mini buffer. The mini buffer is this little window on the bottom. So it's this mini buffer. Mini buffer is right here on the bottom. So when I type Control X, Control F to open a file, the mini buffer is where I'm pointing to the file. If I type meta-x to run a program, that's where it's going to ask me what program I want to run. So this mini buffer is it's like the place where you give Emacs all kinds of different commands. And so if I screw something up and I give it a command I don't want, I just hit Control G a bunch of times and it says quit. So if I hit Control Z, Control X, Control H, and I don't know what that does. I'm just going to hit Control G and it quits me from the buffer. Okay. And then I typed Control X, Control H, and that happens to be the next command that I was going to tell you about. That runs help. So if I run any command and then Control H, it'll give me help on that command. You can also run F1. Oops. If I run F1, it gives me a little prompt in the mini buffer. It says type question mark for further options. So I type question mark. Okay, and it gives me a bunch of options. So I can, if I want to, I can search for a command. I can get help on that command. I can look through the documentation. I can, describe functions. I can go to info pages, which are kind of like the manual pages. Can everyone see that okay? Okay. So there's a lot of built-in documentation. And so this Control H can give you help. F1 can also give you help. Okay, so I mentioned that the Emacs is like an operating system unto itself. Um, you can run a debugger through it. You can, compare two different files side by side and highlight changes between those two files. You can use Dired, which is like a file browser. So so Emacs just does all kinds of different things, and the way it does that is using this metax command. So if I type metax and then I type gdb, then it's going to run gdb inside Emacs. And so when I load up my program in gdb and I run it, then not only will it give me all the gdb output in an Emacs buffer so that I could, copy and paste that to another text document if I wanted to, but also it's going to show me the source code in the other frame. So as I step through the source code, I'm going to get to actually see the source code in the other frame. So not only can it run Emacs, but it can also, not only can it run GDB, but it can also, edit the text of your source code file. So there's lots of really nice features like this all throughout Emacs. So another one is this ediff. If I run ediff and I give it the names of two files, it's going to show those two files side by side, and it's going to highlight the differences between those files. I'll talk a little bit more about this Dired command. This is really nice because it's like Finder, except more powerful. It's like, Finder or Explorer or, whatever your equivalent is on your operating system. There's also lots of interesting features like this calendar. So if I type metax calendar, it opens a calendar. And I can use the same shortcuts for moving through this calendar that I can use for moving through a document. So Control A in a text document brings me to the beginning of a line. Control A in the calendar brings me to the beginning of a week. If I do, let's see, what's the command? Well, yeah, I don't remember any of the other commands. But so if you're an Emacs user, then moving through this command is just like moving through a text document. So it's very nice. And there's also a journal feature in there, so you can actually, use this as sort of a, calendar / to-do list / task manager. There's also lots of really funny, interesting little features in Emacs, like this spook or zone. So if you're writing an email in Emacs, you can do metax spook, and it'll put in a bunch of crazy keywords to distract Homeland Security. So I mean, there's just all kinds of like weird, funny features like that. If you do metax zone, then your computer just kind of zones out and plays with the text, so it's kind of funny to watch. And then when you're all done, you just touch an arrow key, and it brings back everything just like it was. So there's just all kinds of funny things like that, in addition to it being a very powerful text editor. And this is kind of testament to the fact that there's all kinds of people from all kinds of different backgrounds working on this text editor. Okay, so one of the powers of Emacs is it's got different modes, and so depending on what you're doing, it can be smart about what mode it goes into. So there's text edit mode, which is obviously the default. When you open a file, it's in text edit mode. But there's also other modes like search mode. So there's like 5 different ways to search for things in Emacs. There's Dired mode. So this is the file browser or directory browser that I was just talking about that I'll get to shortly. There's also shell mode, so you can run shells from within Emacs. This is really nice, again, because you can grab text from from the shell output and put it into a document. And you can sort of transfer information among buffers. So it's kind of like having a shell and being able to copy and paste output, except without having to use your mouse and your system clipboard. There's also C and C++ mode. So when you start editing a C or C++ code file, then it'll automatically recognize that you're doing that, and it gives you a set access to a set of commands that are special to C and C++ code. It's also got a version control mode. So if you're looking at a file and Emacs is smart enough to figure out whether that's version controlled, then it gives you, more commands. So if you want to do an svn commit, which I'll get to shortly, if you want to commit a file, or if you want to update a file from your version control software, you can do that from within Emacs using Emacs key bindings. So there's also Viper mode. If you're a VI user, you can use VI key bindings from within Emacs. So there's this thing is like feature packed. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about two modes, because I could literally give a 5-hour tutorial on Emacs and I would just scratch the surface, and I don't want to do that. So there's the basic type of search, which is the incremental search. So to search for something, I do Control S for search, and then I type whatever I want to search for, blah. And when I do that, it's going to search forward from wherever my cursor is, and it's going to find the next instance of the word blah. And if I type Control S again and I don't tell it anything, it's going to search for the next instance of blah. Okay. If I want to search backwards, I can use Control R. This search is in reverse. So I can type Control R blah, and it'll look for the instance of blah that comes, previous to my cursor location. And same thing, if I type Control R with no argument, it'll just search for the previous instance of blah. And then, as usual, Control G is like our get me out of here key. It cancels our search. So let me just show you an example of this. So let's say, I've got this thing called icicles. Let's say I want to look for instances of the word icicles in here. Okay, so I type Control S, icicles, and it automatically starts highlighting everything that matches that. Okay, if I type Control S, it'll take me among the different instances. If I type Control R, it'll search backwards. So it's a really nice feature. And this is just one type of search. As I mentioned, there's like 5 different kinds of search. So, if this search doesn't do what you want, there's probably a search that does exactly what you want. Okay. So there's also this very important feature, search and replace. So maybe you want to replace the word icicles with the word popsicles. I don't know. So the way you do this is using meta-x replace string. So this is a little different. It doesn't have a control binding, but it has a really easy name, replace string. So let's do so I'm going to type Control G to get out of the search. So if I type meta-x replace string, then it's going to say, what string do I want to replace? I'll say icicles. And it says, okay, what string do you want to replace that with? And I'll say popsicles. And there we go. It replaced icicles with popsicles here, here, and here. Okay. So I'm going to undo that so that my Emacs still runs. Okay, I can also do a query replace. This is going to ask me every time it's about to replace something. It's going to say, are you sure you want to replace this instance? So if I do meta and the %, it says query replace. And the default, so this is really nice, the default is to use exactly what I used before. says the default is to replace icicles with popsicles. So I'm just going to leave that. But if I wanted to, I could give it a new string to replace with and a new string to replace it with. Okay, so it says, do I want to query? So it says, do I want to replace this icicles with popsicles? And I say, no. Goes to the next instance and says, do you want to replace this instance of icicles with popsicles? And I say, no. So if I wanted to say yes, I could just type Y for yes, N for no. There's also a couple of other shortcuts. So I can type Y for yes, replace it, N for no, don't replace it. I can also use dot for replace this instance and then get me out of here. I can use the exclamation point for yes, replace the rest and don't even ask me. Or I can use Q for quit. So that's kind of like I don't want to do this. I changed my mind. Q for quit. Okay. So lots of nice features and key bindings available. Okay, so now on to dired. So this is one of the cool features of Emacs that I think it's one of the cooler features. So the way you start dired mode is you type metax dired, or you can just, instead of opening a file, you open a directory. And dired has a couple of key bindings of its own. So so what it does is, I'll show you what it looks like first. So if I do Control X, Control F, it asks me, what file I want to open, and it automatically starts me at my home directory. So I'm just going to say, okay, open my home directory, and it looks like an ls. It looks like when I type ls at a command line, it gives me a list of all the files. Except this is a little more special. So this is basically just a text buffer. It's just taking a bunch of text and put it in a buffer. And now I can edit that text if I want to. If I wanted to, I could also copy that text and paste it in a document. So you kind of see the power of being able to do all of this stuff from within your text editor. You can move information across all kinds of different commands, and push information from one command into another command and do all this kind of stuff. So there's sort of two things we want to do. We want to delete files and we want to modify files. So let's start with modifying files. So if I want to edit a file, let's say I want to edit my bashrc. I put the cursor over my bashrc file and then I type E for edit. And that opens that file in a new buffer. Oops. Okay. So I just type E to edit it, and it opens that file in a new buffer. And when I'm done, I can do Control-X-K, and that tells me to kill this buffer, or in other words, close that file. And I'm back to my dired. And you can see here, it tells you what mode I'm in. It says dired by name. Okay. So another thing we can do is, copy things, rename things, compress things. So let's say I want to compress a file. Let me, just use my bashrc as another example. If I type Shift-Z, it's going to say, do you want me to compress bashrc? If bashrc were an archive file, like a .tar.gz file, then it would uncompress it. But since it's not a compressed file, it's going to compress it. So it asks, do you want to compress or uncompress? I say, yes, I do. And now it's compressed it. And it's done that in place. So it doesn't copy .bashrc, it just replaces .bashrc with the compressed version. So let's say, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Wrong file. I just type Shift-Z again, and I say, yes, I want to uncompress it, and it uncompresses it. So this is like, a really nice feature. So with literally one letter, you can, replace this big, long, ugly command I gave last time. There's also, you can also copy files and rename files. That's pretty self-explanatory. You can also do this deletion thing. So this is pretty interesting. Let's say, let me find something I can delete. Okay, I'll delete this CSV file. So if I type a little d, I see that now there's a D on the far left-hand side. And I can, delete a bunch of files, So these are all marked for deletion, but they haven't been deleted yet. So if I go back to these keyboard shortcuts, you'll see that I can mark something for deletion with the D key, and I can unmark it for deletion with the U key. So let me unmark one of these. Let me unmark this helium data. And if I really want to delete it, so I've marked all this stuff for deletion, now I really want to delete it, I use the X key. And it says, do you really want to delete these 4 files? And I say yes. And it says, okay, 4 deletions done. So you can just do all kinds of stuff that you would normally do in a shell from diode mode, and it's actually a lot easier to do. Okay. And one more thing about this that's really cool is you can go into a diode mode where if you edit the name of a file and you save that buffer, then it'll actually rename that file. So, and you do that by using Control-X, Control-Q to enter an editable diode mode. So I'm going to go Control-X, Control-X, Control-Q, and that's going to put me in an editable diode mode. And let me rename, I'll rename dqmom.pdf to dqmom, oops, what's going on? Why isn't it working? Well, okay. Anyway, so if I were able to get this working, what you'd be able to do is edit the names of files and then save that buffer, and it renames those files. So instead of going through and renaming 20 different files, let's say I have a file named, let's say I have some file 1.txt. I have 5 of those. And I want to replace some file with, and I want to move these to some other file. 1.txt. And I want to do this with all 5. Okay. So one option is to just sit there and give a move command to all 5 of these files. Another option is to write a fancy shell script that'll use sed, that'll search for some file and replace it with some other file, and pipe that and do some trickery on the command line. Or your last option, which is probably the easiest, is open up your Emacs browser, your diode Emacs, and do a search and replace. So you search for some file and you replace it with some other file. And it'll go through and rename all those files in your buffer. You save your buffer and you're done. So renaming files is literally as easy as searching and replacing text in your text editor. So you can really reuse a lot of knowledge from one application into another application. And so this is part of the whole, power of having an all-in-one package. Okay, and just one last word on this Viper mode. I personally use VI, and sometimes I need to use Emacs for running a debugger or for whatever purpose. And so if I want to work in Emacs extensively, but I don't remember all the handy commands to move through Emacs Word documents, then I can use Viper mode, and that makes all the VI key bindings work in Emacs. And the advantage of that is I've got all the power of Emacs and all the familiarity of VI. And so I can just do that by running metax Viper mode. Oops. And so it gives me all kinds of information about this. I'm going to say 1. So now if I make a new buffer, then I can use Emacs. I can use the VI keys. So if I type, if I type I for insert, then I'm going to be put in the VI insert mode. So anyway, that's just a really nice, handy feature if you're a VI user and you have to use Emacs. Okay, and then just to reiterate, if you need help, you type Control-H or F1. Or you go to Google. Sometimes that's easier. Okay, so now I'd like to talk. Yeah, questions.
Have you launched Tetris?
Yeah. Okay. So the comment was about Tetris. So you can actually run Tetris. If you do metax Tetris, it's got a built-in Tetris game.
Could you split the buffer so it seems like they're working on the
Yeah, you can. Oops. Yeah. So if I do. So I can edit my .emacs file in one window, and then when I switch back to Tetris, I can keep playing Tetris. And if I see somebody coming and I want to make it look like I'm working, I do Control-X, Control-B. Oops. Or, yeah, Control-X, Control-B. Yeah. Yeah. So it's fun. There's games like Pong. You can have Pong. So there's all kinds of ways to waste time. There's also one really interesting game. It's not really an interactive game. It's the game of life. Has everybody heard of the game of life? So there's like a random probability that given. So these little symbols mean that there's life in that particular cell. And there's a random probability that life will spread to other cells and that life will stay alive in a particular cell. So you end up with all kinds of interesting patterns. And it's, yeah.
This is China.
So you can get lots of really interesting patterns and interesting things you can see. And it's kind of fun to just let that run in the background for like 2 hours and then come back to it. And it's like this enormous thing. Anyway. So lots of ways to waste time in Emacs. So Emacs kind of gives you all these productivity tools, and then it takes away by giving you all these games. Okay. So now I'd like to move on to VI. And just to note, VI and Vim are the same thing. So when I say VI or when I say Vim, it means the same program. So to open Vim, we just type Vim and a file name. That'll open that file in Vim. Or we can just type Vim by itself and it'll open an empty buffer. So Vim is kind of similar to Emacs in the sense that it has different modes. It has normal mode, which is like a do stuff mode. It has a command mode, which is a do more stuff mode. It has insert mode, which is like when you want to type stuff, when you want to enter text. It has a visual mode. This is like a select stuff mode. So it's got these different modes, and you use different keys to enter those different modes. And depending on what mode you're in, the letter keys are going to do different things. Okay. So I'll talk first about command mode, and this is you just enter this by typing colon. And this is kind of where you really interface with VI itself. So you can type control or colon E, that'll open a file. So you type colon E and then you give it the name or location of the file. You can type control W, or sorry, colon W, and that'll write the file to disk. So this is this whole idea that until you save a file, it's just on a scratch buffer. So if I type colon W, that writes those changes to the disk. If I type colon Q, that means quit. And I can also string these commands together and make things like colon WQ. So just to give you an example. So if I just type vim and then a file, then I'm in vim. And so if I immediately open a file in vim and I start typing, this is a test. Well, okay, maybe that wasn't a good example. If I just start typing letters, it's not going to do anything. It says I don't know what you're doing until I type a special key. Then it starts inserting text. Okay? So the reason is, if you look at the bottom, it's going to give me some information. It's similar to Emacs in that sense. And it doesn't say anything special here. It just doesn't say anything. That means I'm in normal mode. And in normal mode, you can't insert text. So in order to insert text, I have to enter insert mode. Okay? So just to show you how to enter command mode, I just type a colon, and it gives me a little, kind of like a Vim mini buffer. You can think of it that way. So I can type colon E, and then open a file, .emacs. So I can type colon E and then .emacs. That'll open my .emacs file. And just to let you know, this .emacs and .vimrc files, these are files that Vim and Emacs read when they start up. So you can set different options in those. Okay. And then if I want to quit, it's just colon Q, and it quits. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions so far? I'm just going to ignore you. Oh yeah. So you probably saw that when I edited a file and then I said, oops, I didn't want to do that. I delete all the stuff I entered. If I try and quit now, it says, you haven't written since you last changed it. That means you've changed the buffer, but you haven't saved anything. And so it says, add exclamation mark to override. So what that means is if you type colon Q, it's going to say I can't quit. I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to save this or what. So if I type, so I can either type WQ, that'll write it and quit, or I can type Q exclamation mark, which means quit and don't save any of the changes I've made. Okay. Okay. So you can also do a couple of other things from command mode. So when you first look at Vim, you kind of have this mentality like, wow, this is really primitive technology. It's just a plain text editor. It can't do anything. Well, there are a lot of different features of VI. You just have to turn them on. And so the command mode can help you turn on and off different features. So you can set line wrapping using set wrap or set no wrap. You can turn on or off line numbering. You can turn highlighting on and off. You can turn syntax coloring on and off. So just to show you a couple of these examples. So if I type set number, it's going to give me a bunch of line numbers. so I can really clearly see what line number I'm at. And this isn't part of the text document, it's just there for your reference. So if I want to scroll down to line 101, I just scroll down until I find, okay, there's line 101. Okay. And I can turn it off by saying set no number, and then line numbers go away. Okay. I can also do set HLS. So what this does is when I search for something, it'll highlight whatever I'm searching for. So let's say and I'll talk more about searching in just a minute, but let's say I search for the word color. It's going to highlight the word color because I searched for the word color. But if I turn off that color highlighting, I say set no HLS, then it's not going to highlight that, but I can still search for color. So now color's not highlighted, but I can still search for it. Same thing with syntax. Syntax off turns off all that syntax coloring. And syntax on turns on that coloring. So this kind of coloring is really nice, especially if you're working with C++ code or Fortran code. It automatically, colors, predefined types. So if you type int or double, then it'll highlight that in one color, and then it'll highlight everything else in different color. And it's got all kinds of nice features to help you, complete your code and make sure you understand what's going on. Okay. So there's also this insert mode. This is how you enter insert mode. You've got a couple of different options, and you'll notice a pattern here that's repeated throughout Vim. You've got lowercase letter that means one thing, and the uppercase version of that is like a special version of that. So lowercase I inserts at the beginning of your cursor location. Shift I inserts at the beginning of your line. Same thing with A. Little a inserts after your cursor location, and Shift A inserts you at the end, puts you in insert mode at the end of the line. And Escape gets you out of insert mode and puts you in normal mode. So if I want to insert something, I just type I, and that puts me in insert mode. I can see at the very bottom left, it tells me I'm in insert mode. I say some color scheme stuff. Okay, I'm all done. I hit escape, and now I'm back in normal mode. Same thing with A. If I type A, it goes to the next character. Now I'm in insert mode, and so on. And if I want to insert something at the very beginning, I type Shift I, and it takes me to the beginning of the line and puts me in insert mode. Okay. So, pretty straightforward. So the thing with a lot of these commands is, when you first start, you feel like it's just sort of overwhelming. There's all these different keys to learn. There's all these different shortcuts. But the trick to learning either Vim or Emacs is just to keep using it. One thing I like to do is print out a cheat sheet. And you can find all kinds of different cheat sheets all over the internet that'll give you a one-page summary of all the important commands in VI or Emacs that you should know. Like how to move through files, how to open files, how to save files. You can even find cheat sheets on each different mode. So if you want to learn how to use diode mode, you can find a diode mode cheat sheet. And you can post those in your office right next to your computer. So as you're using your computer, you say, oh, what's the command to go to the end of a paragraph? You just look at your cheat sheet. And after a while, you don't need your cheat sheet anymore because it's all just second nature. Okay. So just a couple words about what normal mode is for. So I said normal mode was like a do stuff mode. So you can use normal mode to move through your document. You can type W to move forward a word, B to move backwards one word, JK moves the cursor down and up, H and L moves it left and right. U is for undo. That's a really handy one to know. and you know, little o and big O open a new line above or below the cursor. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I want to, you know, move around my document, if I hold the W key down, it moves through the document by word. Okay, let me turn on my on-screen keyboard. Okay, so if I'm typing W, then it's moving through this document word by word. Okay. And if I type B, it's going to move backwards through the document word by word. Okay. Same thing with J and K. J moves me down, K moves me up. L goes to the right, H goes to the left. Okay. So, you know, pretty straightforward. And then if I want to use this little o, so little o opens a new line right below where my cursor was, and it puts me in insert mode. So I'm going to hit escape and then U for undo. And then if I type capital O, it opens a new line above where my cursor is. Okay. Okay. There's also, you can also delete words. So if this little d, that means delete. So the neat thing about insert mode is you can chain things together. So when you type this delete key, it doesn't immediately delete something because it doesn't know what to delete. So you can delete a word, you can delete a sentence, you can delete an entire line, or if you want to, you can delete your entire document. And you can modify, so you can modify this delete command with different letters, and you can modify the commands with different numbers. So if I type capital G, that's the Vim shortcut for go to the end of the document. And if I type little g twice, that's the command to go to the beginning of the document. So if I now combine that with the delete command, if I say D capital G, that's going to say delete everything from my cursor to the end of the document. Then I can type undo. And if I run that command from, you know, halfway through the document or a portion of the way through the document, then it'll only delete things from my cursor to the end of the document. Same thing with the two little g's. So if I type little g, that'll take me to the beginning of the document. So D little g deletes everything from my cursor to the beginning of the document. So you can kind of, you know, combine these things. If you want to delete 4 words, you can do D. Well, so if you want to delete a word, you do DW. That'll delete whatever, you know, whatever word your cursor's on. If you do D4W, that means delete 4 words. It'll delete 4 words. Okay. So, kind of interesting syntax. You can really, it's really powerful because it's all, you know, stringing things together and using these different shortcuts in combination. So lots of neat things. And if you talk to an experienced VI user, or if you go online and look at, you know, people's, you know, their own cheat sheets or things that they use and shortcuts they use in VI, you'll just be blown away by the number of cool things you can do. So this is just sort of giving you an idea of what you can do. But when you start, you know, learning more of the VI syntax and how to do more things with VI, it gets really neat what you can do. Search mode, yeah, this is really easy. You just type slash, and then you type whatever you want to search for. So slash the thing I am searching for. And it'll search with spaces, you know. If I search for some color scheme stuff, then it'll find that whole string. One kind of counterintuitive thing, though, when you start using search is if you use the period command, that's a wildcard command. So it's not going to look for a literal period. And it's the same way with a couple of other characters, like the $sign character. So a couple of these, you have to escape them by using backslash. So if I want to search for a literal period, I have to put backslash period. Otherwise, you can use the period in a kind of interesting way. You could say sum dot color dot scheme dot stuff, and it finds this because it replaces those dots with spaces. And it says this matches. But if I replace these with underscores, and then I searched for the same thing, sum.color.scheme.stuff, it still finds it, because that period is just a wildcard character. Okay. And so you can just, search for, Vim wildcards or, Vim search characters. And, there's all kinds of different things you can do. You can search for, you can put a placeholder for any digit, or a placeholder for any lowercase character, or any uppercase character, any word, any punctuation, all this different kinds of stuff. There's also search and replace. So this is the other really important half of searching. So the search and replace syntax is a little different than the search. The syntax looks like this: colon, %s, the string you want to find, and the string you want to replace it with. And you can use this. So this is just one way to use it. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. So this % is a special character that means the whole document. You can also search for a range. Like if you want to look for something between line 10 and line 15, you can do that. If you want to search for, another thing is, if you run this and you have multiple instances of string 1, it's only going to replace the first instance. So you can give it modifiers like G. So G means global. It'll replace all instances of string 1 with string 2, no matter how many there are on a line. You can also give it this modifier C. This gives you confirmation. So this is like the like with what we saw with Emacs. We can have it query us whether we're sure we want to replace that. So if I do %s color scheme something else, and I say C or GC, then it's going to say, do you want me to replace color scheme with something else? Maybe I say Y for yes. Okay, then it goes to the next instance. I say no for no. If I give it Shift N, then it means no for all the remaining answers. If I give it Shift Y, it means yes for all the remaining answers. And if I want to get out of there, I just hit escape. Okay. So, and these strings are just the same as search. If you want to look for a literal period, then you have to put \period. Otherwise, it's going to look for anything. If you put string 1 dot, it's going to look for any instance of string 1 with any character that comes after it. So there you go. One last thing. This is probably the one mode that I use the most, and that's visual mode. So this is basically the equivalent of selecting text and using copy and paste in a standard text editor, like a GUI text editor. So if I type Shift V, I can see it's putting me in visual mode and it's selecting whole lines at a time. So I can select, a bunch of different stuff. And if and I've got 3 commands available to me. One is yank, which is with the Y key. That means copy. So if I press Y, it copies it. The other is the D key, which is for cut. So if I type D, it cuts it. And then the last key is P for paste. So I deleted a bunch of text. Let's say I want to paste it, somewhere further down in the document. I type P, and it puts all that stuff back in the document. Okay. There's also the related command Control V. That'll select blocks at a time. So I can, do stuff with blocks. So if I want to delete, all the words, yeah, you get the idea. If I want to delete color scheme, I can just type D. It deletes that block, and so on. Okay. So that's a really handy mode to have. Yeah, and then so Emacs you can run shells in. You can kind of do that in VI. The one difference, the biggest difference between VI and Emacs is people who use VI and people who develop VI will straight out say that it's not intended to do what Emacs does. It's intended to be a text editor, and that's it, nothing more. So you're really limited in your ability to do kind of system level things. So you can run shell commands, but it's not as nice as in Emacs. So you can use exclamation point to run a shell command, and that'll give you the output in your little mini buffer. So if I type, exclamation point ls, it's gonna run the ls command, and then when I hit escape, let's see, why isn't it? Yeah. Okay, I'll skip to the next one. So you can also run a shell command and have it dump the output into your text document. So I use 2 exclamation points and an ls. And now my text document actually has all this stuff in it. So I can, delete it. I can modify it. So this is kind of handy if you need to put a big long directory in your text file and you don't want to type the whole thing out and make typos. You can just run a shell command to list files in a certain directory, and it'll list that path correctly, and it'll put it straight into your document. Okay. And then if you want to get a shell prompt kind of temporarily, you don't want to stop editing your file, but you want to get a shell prompt to do something, you can type :sh. And so I can do stuff from my shell, ls, pwd. And then when I type Control D, which is kind of like a break, it's like a standard Unix command for break, Control D puts me back in my file. So there's lots of nice features of VI, but they're not as integrated, not as nice as in Emacs. So, and that's it on VI. Last thing's help. You can type :help, get some help, :help, and then the command name, it'll give you information about that particular letter or that command or whatever. And that's it. So I just want to take a short break before I go into version control. So I'll talk a little bit about version control and then documentation using Doxygen, and then that'll conclude everything. So.
When he's sick, I'm blaming you.
Am I moving too fast? You getting all this? Your answer doesn't count anymore. Yes. No.
The average.
Is there like a different version of Emacs that on the like from the cluster?
No. It's the same one.
So why does it open in? So if I'm like logged in and I open my C files from that, it gives me a new window instead of running in the current terminal.
Because Emacs by default opens on the clusters. It opens a GUI, like an X11 GUI window.
Yeah.
If you can give it an argument that'll open it in the terminal window.
Just another thing to add to my bash.
Yeah, or you can just add an alias. So whenever you type Emacs, it'll be Emacs. I think it's dash no window or something like that.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to do the flash conversion, but I mean,
I'll take care of it if you just give me the modify.
yeah.